As the Doomslayer tore through the umbral planes, it was not really so clear as to why the demons feared only him, which has been repeated time and time again. In Doom 2016, your body could literally be torn in half by a Baron of Hell, much like any other human the demon came across. In Doom Eternal, fighting would take on more of a mobility front than just a stand-and-fight mentality, which I suppose you could fear the hookshot, but it would appear mostly that the demons had to contend with the behemoth demigod swinging from wall to wall, smashing your face in, which arguably, I guess, is pretty terrifying, but still, why would the demons actually fear him? With Doom the Dark Ages shedding more light on this issue, we have seen why the demons run soiling their digitigrade armoring. The Doomslayer in Doom the Dark Ages is an apocalypse personified, as he would tear through the umbral planes depending on who's operating them, which when I was the Atlan, I would make sure to destroy all infrastructure I could, as I knew what was coming to Earth later. Hell would unknowingly be knocked back onto its heels to such a level it would induce physical changes in the denizens that were still confined within the realm. Also, YouTube is majorly screwing with this channel. Basically, they artificially inflated the view count on YouTube Shorts, which is hilarious. I've done YouTube Shorts in the past, and this has shifted the sub to view metric of this channel, which is really negative, actually. They literally fix one thing and they ruin 10 others. So if you do enjoy this episode, please leave a like and consider subscribing to pull it out of this stupid rut that it's in. Thank you very much. So with the Doomslayer entering Hell several times and destroying anything he came across, it became apparent that the demons that you were squaring off with would forever be changed by the untold scores that were now fertilizing the back 40. As a commenter on my previous video put it, which I completely agree with, those big strong demons are all dead as they faced off with the Doomslayer. Only the ones that ran away from the fight actually survived, or those who just got lucky and were not in the path of destruction. Again, this is pretty true, which we did not know at the time when we were actually fighting within the other Doom games. These were just remnants, possibly just even small contingents of what was left over from Hell, which makes it even more embarrassing that humanity was getting absolutely stomped by these clowns. But that just shows how powerful Hell's armies actually were against your regular inhabitant of this realm. So as we look at the demons who were exposed to the fighting and what would ultimately be left over, we can see Hell was hurting pretty bad, almost as bad as getting defeated in a fiddle contest. Completely rocked by the loss. Well, actually, I don't really know if... Should we put a spoiler alert here? I mean, you did click on this video discussing Doom the Dark Ages, so I don't know, you got like 3 seconds to bail. 3, 2, 1, I'm still here. Okay, so once Azrak got kicked because they removed the glory kills for the most part. I know, I'm jumping on Ackman's bandwagon, but he is correct. Why would you get rid of the glory kills? They were insanely satisfying. I know, like once every 100 you get one, but it's just sawing them in half with your shield. Anyways, so as you kick the prince and then in a cutscene completely wreck his face and remove his head, the demons would retreat into a much more feral state, but they had not been entirely defeated, as can be seen by the events of Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. However, through that time frame, they would be forever altered, but the question is why? One such demon, which we are discussing today, I would propose received the second greatest physical mutation due to the complete lack of direction the demons had at this point in time. Potentially an overbreeding issue in order to attempt to recover from the absolute ass kicking that they just received. The Pinky Demon is a shell of its former self. So I think the best way to do this is we will be comparing the physiological mutations is to first discuss the Pinky Demon, which appears to be closer to its more native form, and then discuss what may have happened in the resulting physiological changes that we see later. So as the conflict between the Night Sentinels and the demons of Hell begins to kick off, as we all know at this point, the Makers were being complete chodes, and despite having an actual alliance with the Night Sentinels, they were quite a selfish race. They would end up actively attempting to prevent the rise of the Doomslayer by utilizing the Divinity Machine to judge the strongest of the Night Sentinels and weed out the Dark One, as they called it, who would ultimately be the Doomslayer. But come on, man, he's the Doomslayer. He ain't going out like that. So with this process completely not working as intended, it would become apparent that while the Makers said they were there to help, some of Argent D'Nur would continue to question if this was really the case. You can't deny the old mirror neuron cluster in the brain. It does pick up things that you may not be thinking of. And it apparently also works when dealing with aliens as well. So as the demons would exit out of Hell due to the meddling of the Makers, creating areas that the demons could actually slip through, which were basically the security measures to contain it, this full-scale invasion would be launched, as the Night Sentinels would then pick up arms to defend their homes. The problem with demons is, though, you'll also be picking up a lot of arms later, because they tend to rip you apart. Ah, man, the dad jokes, I'm in great pain. I want you to know, this is inevitable. This is just what happens as you start hitting a boomer status. Get ready, brother. It's coming. This channel is 6 years old, almost 7 at this point. Some of you have been here since the beginning. It's coming for you too. Anyhow, nightmarish march of time aside, Argent Inert descended into one massive battlefield where the Night Sentinels, despite being excellent warriors, would be knocked back onto their heels quite a bit. Requiring the Doomslayer to be launched from the Maker's ship, he would be under their control momentarily before eventually breaking free of his confines and attacking the demons at his own discretion. The Makers, with the big fat one in charge, clearly he has a name, I think Creed Maker, but he's made of slugs who are fat, so anyways, the Fat Maker would be working against the Doomslayer, which is fundamentally sewer slide. Instead, thinking that Megamind was the way to go and back up due to his own cowardice, he would attempt to hamper the Doomslayer in any way possible, but this would ultimately not work. So as the Doomslayer descended into the battlefield and could not be recalled back to the ship, scores of demons would begin to be ripped apart by him, or just bashed apart by Blood Punch, or maybe a nice berserk perhaps, even a mace the size of a human torso. Whichever you prefer, it really doesn't matter because demonic body parts would go flying as high as the bloodlust levels the more the Doomslayer destroyed these creatures. One such creature that was presented a fair amount of challenge, at least to regular people, would be the Pinky Rider. Yes, you see, this thing that the other thing is riding on top of is in fact the Pinky. But before we get into its physiology, we have to understand a few things actually about the Pinky Demon. The Pinky Demon at this point in time actually comes in a few shades of coloring, pink being the standard as this would be its natural skin tone, although I would hazard a guess, given the imps that we see, since it does have hair, that these creatures were also likely mammalian as well, and they've just been altered. Although, it's like trying to recall someone's name that you hung out with that one time at a bar several months ago. As they walk up and know your name, it's kind of awkward that I can't remember where I read. No, the riders are reptilian, that's right, because we're going to talk about that here in a moment. But also, they came in kind of like an albino coloring and a darker coloring. So, personal problems aside with my memory, these Pinky Riders are actually pretty fair weather. They have chosen to ride the Pinky Demons into battle. The bloodlust of the Pinky Demon is something to be feared if you are your average person because of the amount of bloodlust that these creatures actually just naturally harbor. It is well known that the mounts will actively attack anything in front of it, devouring them entirely in just a few bites, whether you are wearing armor or not. You'll find a lot of people on the outskirts of the battlefield are horrifically injured, whether it be like missing arms or legs, or literally almost half their body. In this case, those people are not moving anymore. If you wonder why this is the case, yes, it could be other demons just ripping off limbs for funsies, but you really never see where those limbs are or where they end up, and there's just a disturbing amount of them missing, so it's very likely that these people actually came across a Pinky Demon and literally had them bitten off before they knew what was happening, and then they were able to run away while the Pinky Demon chowed down on their separated limb. At least it was momentarily focused on that. But the problem with the Pinky Demon is that it doesn't just stop at eating things in front of them. And I quote, "Reptilian mounts of the Archer-class demons, these horned quadrupeds delivered unmatched speed and ferocity to Azrak's invading forces. Spawned from the hellfire pits of the Umbral Plains, they are known to be sentinels as Pinky Riders. Yet their loyalty is as fleeting as their lives. The demon prince casts them aside without hesitation when their war-scarred bodies finally give out. Riders choose these savage beasts for a chance at fleeting glory in the underworld's halls, but such glory comes with a price. Many sentinels have witnessed the gruesome spectacle of Pinkies turning on their riders, devouring them in blood-soaked chaos of battle. It is well known that Pinkies are barely controllable as a class of demon whose function would change over time depending on what was necessary and even what the demons had at this point. When after getting their neighborhood stomped out by me and Atlan, that's right, the demons who have been referred to as mortally challenged beings, don't feel bad for them. And if you do feel bad for them, you're a huge dork. They wouldn't feel bad tearing out your spine. As we take a look at the Pinky Demon mount, usually after the rider's already been completely blasted apart on top of it, it's hard to say if it's grateful or not. But given that it's still trying to bite you, I would say not grateful. As a result, you have no choice but to swing away Meryl at its head as well. But this is where the most interesting aspect of its physiology is shown. These creatures sport powerful legs and a robust build, but given the amount of muscle that they have, they are still quite agile, and any human dealing with this thing would have difficulty keeping up unless you were just like a literal Spartan or the Doomslayer with a reaction time and capability to move well beyond what a regular person could do. But let's be real, the Night Sentinels didn't really bark up that technological tier, and instead they branched out into the Gears of War build, becoming ridiculously swole instead, which I can't fault them for that. I too am going for the Clayton Carmine build, repping those 110 pound dumbbells on bench at this point. Shoulder, not really enjoying it, but you know what? What price would you pay for eternal glory? So, as we look at them, I think we all know where we need to start, as this will highlight the absolute degradation of their build later when we look at the pinkies that we all know and hate now. Starting with the feet, we see that on the back legs, this creature is in fact going to have a digit grid structuring of its leg. They have what appear to be toes in the back with a large claw, or at least two large claws, several inches in length that give it plenty of grip when running through terrain, allowing for it to change the direction of its massive body quite easily. As we move up to the knees of this creature on the back legs specifically, we can see, like with many other species that we're exposed to, Davoths, except apparently you can't say Davoth, Davoth. There we go. Somebody said they were gonna track me down because in the last episode I said Davoth. You know what? Dayman, that's all I'm saying. Anyway, there's new bony protrusions in this area and it seems like a terrible placement as when it runs, there is a real threat that if it jumps down from somewhere high, it could completely disembowel itself, stabbing its front arms as well. But hey, I didn't ask these bones to grow there, so it's not really my problem. As we move up to the thighs, we see that in many areas these new bony growths have formed, but all in all, those are more located on the back of the leg. Continue to follow this area, we see the large tail can be seen, and it's also quite muscular, ruling out that it's really like a horse tail or anything of the sort. While I do not believe it to be a prehensile tail, used for like grabbing onto anything, given the growth at the end of it, seeing the two large horn-like protrusions, I imagine these would be used defensively, much like how a Stegosaurus would have used its tail. It could swing it and potentially hit predators, and if it were successful, this could inflict quite a bit of damage.
Now that's a lot of damage!
Now, exposure to hell energy has obviously grown these horns, but they were likely much more barb-like in the past. They've just increased in size, as with all traits being ridiculously upsized. So as we follow its back, we can see patches of hair indicating that this creature is very likely a mammal of its own realm, which again, we have seen also displayed on the imps. It seems like the realms appear to have similar aspects to one another given the bipedal unwilling that stumble around and humans appearing also fairly similar when we are exposed to hell energy. I mean, Davoth, you know what? I'm Googling this. Not really sure why I had to Google that. I've played through the whole freaking game. Anyways, Davoth also looks like a human who looks like the Doomslayer, who looks like Greg from accounting. There are repeating patterns all throughout this game, if we are being completely honest. But this patch of fur indicates that this is in fact this realm's version of a mammal, and the reptilian creature on top is not one of the unwilling, but potentially from a different plane of existence, maybe like the cosmic realm, since that's come into play. So as we move up to the head of this creature, we can definitely tell this creature is a pinky demon. Do not take a shot every time I say creature. Flanking each side of the mouth are a set of horns followed by external mandibles, which then you're not gonna believe this, are followed by smaller internal mandibles. The horns would clearly be used for protection, giving it the capability of ramming into anything the Night Sentinels or humans create and knocking it over, which will become important later. The secondary mandibles are larger and appear to potentially increase the bite radius, inducing more damage to anything or maybe possibly used in order to hold on to prey that it has found. The second mandibles or internal mandibles have teeth located on them, which will be used for chewing. The eyes of the pinky demon are just as beady as its predecessors will have, and it also has a massive ridge line that runs down the center of its skull where bone actually has continued to grow. Now the question is, were these animals always carnivorous? I think it's kind of unlikely. We see hell energy basically generated from Davoth is because he was upsetting spaghetti over being sealed in his realm by his own creations, which I get kind of would piss me off too, but he makes everything aggressive. The entire food web that we know of would have been upended and everything exposed to it would become more aggressive from its original self. These creatures were very likely potentially similar to a combination of what could be kind of like a large cat and a horse on Earth. Given its posturing with large shoulder blades, this would be very similar to that of a large cat on Earth, and its pouncing behavior must also be noted. With a tail as large as it is, that would also hint at its original lineage. Have you ever seen like a jaguar's tail or, I don't know, a tiger's tail? They're pretty long and they're fairly muscular. However, you're also probably not a night elf, so it's very unlikely that you could ride a large cat of another world, but something like a horse you might be able to jump onto. Now, something to take into consideration, however, is that the behavior of this creature, while altered by hell energy, is still very likely containing a shred of the original creature's modus operandi, or MO as they call it. As a result, this creature was at minimum probably omnivorous, but potentially more docile, meaning that the original inhabitants could interact with them. But once hell energy makes the scene, it turns into a horrific hell spawn that is just as likely to eat its rider as it would the person in front of it, who is the enemy. As the battle continued on Argentinur and into Hell, this would culminate into large swaths of demon being absolutely annihilated. And they were. The pinky demon actually would also fall in droves. The thing about these creatures is that there is not an infinite amount of them. These particular ones that were spawned had to be trained, equipped with armor by other demons, bred for this purpose. Basically, there is a lot of work that went into making each one of these demons. So as the Doomslayer tore through them like paper, this would begin decreasing their overall numbers. Because remember, the game does not accurately show the raising of hell. What it does show is basically certain areas you were causing destruction, but the reality is entire armies were sent to stop the Doomslayer and they would all be destroyed. Thousands, perhaps millions, but probably not billions, would be torn apart at the hands of the Doomslayer. Now, as you might imagine, this would create a bit of a genetic bottleneck. Humanity actually went through one of these allegedly about 900,000 years ago. Essentially, based on genetic data, in Africa, something cataclysmic happened that caused our population numbers to drop to just about 1,280 individuals. Those that clung to the coast managed to survive by eating animals in the water, but anyone who was out on land didn't fare very well. In fact, they didn't fare at all. They died. And this was thought to have been triggered by the planet cooling, which would then lead to massive droughts and food would become incredibly scarce. Now, what does a genetic bottleneck actually do? Well, you have to think about this logically. First, you have a ton of genes that go missing within just one generation. These genes could have coded for things like dealing with environmental issues, such as certain diseases, or possibly resistance to them. Phenotypic traits would also be lost, meaning entire facial structures, bone builds, heights, muscular presentation, extra ligaments, or anything that was useful in the body. It's just all gone now because of this event. And because of this, if you've ever wondered why you have doppelgangers out there, like some people tell me I either look like Aaron Paul or Luke Bryan, it's because there's only so many combinations of genes to create different structures from the 1,200 that were around. Now, with our own genetic bottleneck in history, the good thing is there was enough genetic diversity in order to make sure inbreeding was not too much of an issue, unless you were royalty and just Habsburging it up, which, have you seen those jaw? Greg, pull up the Habsburg jaw. This is a result of inbreeding time and time again. The reason we don't have this issue is that we were actually able to maintain genetic diversity is you need around 50 breeding individuals or 25 pairs. But this is just to avoid, I guess, inbreeding in the short term. Long-term evolutionary potential requires around 500 people. Humanity had less than 3 times what was needed to keep us going, which when you say it in that way, it's like, oh, we had 3 times the amount. But if you take into the consideration how much there were versus now, let's do some quick maths. I believe that would be 1,280 divided by, we'll say 8 billion. That would be 0.00158% of our population now was, and obviously there was less people back then, but that is a infinitesimally small amount. That is crazy how close we were skirting that edge. Do you understand how lucky we got? Well, obviously way luckier than the Pinky Demons. So the Pinky, after this onslaught, was hit with a 1-2 punch. On the one hand, Megamind would be lost, meaning the demons once again had no direction and everyone was scattered, running for their lives. The other issue came from the fact that so many of them were lost to the Doomslayer, given that the demons may not have had an understanding of the consequences of inbreeding, which, technologically, they were really not that impressive, barring the denizens of Amora. In order to recover, the minor powers that would form afterward would likely start to ramp up production of the Pinkies, which they just used whatever they had left. And this would only induce problems with genetic diversity, but it's likely in order to overcome the shortcomings brought on by these issues, they would expose them to more hell energy. But you might be asking, well, what exactly would be these problems and why is it such an issue? The thing to remember about inbreeding, which obviously is the relation of close individuals, I think it's something like within humanity, you're safe technically if you go after your 4th cousin, but Papa Roanoke's gonna tell you, just go find somebody different. And I also, just another thing, all of us are related, at least in some capacity. It's just how it is. But you have something known as homozygosity. Homozygosity is essentially when 2 recessive alleles could be inherited from both, you get one from one parent, one from the other parent, and then you actually display this recessive trait, whereas you need a dominant trait that could be the healthy one. So the problem with recessive traits being kind of the front runners, I guess you could say, it really can create problems. Not to mention you have something known as inbreeding depression, and this essentially will stop anybody from being really fit for their environment. There could be issues like, your teeth fall out, or you have less muscle mass, or you have deformities. But essentially also another part of like actual depression of inbreeding would be higher infant mortality. You'd be a smaller person in general. And one of the things that is not really taken into account a lot of the times is actually your resistance to diseases. There's a lot of diseases out there that when you get different genetic information, you actually inherit different ways to attack a disease. So if you took somebody, like if you took one family, right, and they were all just inbreeding all the time, bit of a problem there, and then like a disease sweeps through, if one of them could get infected, it's very likely all of them could get infected, and if one of them dies from it, it's very likely all of them can die from it. It's sort of like the Central Europeans who had the Delta 32 allele mutation, which actually caused them to be resistant or immune to one of the infection methods of HIV. Basically, there was a receptor that is typically actually present on top of the cell surface, and that's how HIV is latching on and then brought into the cell. But with the Delta 32 allele mutation, actually it forms inside of the cell membrane, or it's just barely peeking over the surface, so HIV has issue latching onto that. So these issues all come down to how many genes are just kind of backing each other up and making this a recessive issue. So I'm living in Alabama right now. I know everybody dogs on Alabama for like ding, 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 ding. But here's the thing. You can marry your first cousin in New York. Yeah. So the enlightened Northeast. What's going on over there, guys? That's kind of weird. Anyways, so this is kind of what was happening with the Pinkies. They were all hooking up with their sisters because that was all that was left. Not a great time to be a Pinky Demon. Now, I have an entire video dedicated to the discussion of the Pinkies later in the franchise, but you know what? We do it live around here. Starting with the feet, we can see these creatures' claws have turned into just massive blunt keratin protrusions. Armoring all over their body is naturally occurring at this point, and it has been added intentionally. And they have kept the digigrid structuring, but at this point it has become more pronounced and deformed, essentially putting the knees well past the feet, which would make them incredibly ungainly whenever it runs or walks. As we move the legs, it's clear, given the original Pinkies did not have armor plating, that they were destroyed by the Doomslayer, and this was bred in for the purpose of attempting to protect the Pinky, because if you swung a mace at that thing, you were hitting the shoulders and the head. In some ways, they were correct, but you don't have enough armor to stop the Doomslayer. Many Pinkies dropped even due to regular countermeasures by the Night Sentinels though, and because they had no naturally occurring armor, it has been noted, as hell emerged on Earth, the Pinky began to appear on terrestrial soil in great numbers, rapidly becoming the bane of the existence for the ARC military fortifications. Utilizing its armored frontal carapace, the Pinky is able to penetrate defensive encampments, breaking through wall defenses and using its ramming ability to upturn and immobilize armored vehicles. ARC deployments dependent on their ability to hold the line against encroaching forces of hell could be disrupted and even overtaken by a single Pinky were it able to penetrate and break through their defensive matrix, allowing a greater demon influx to pour in after it. The ARC rapidly prioritized the target status of the Pinky, issuing high-range bombardment to prevent the Pinky from gaining proximity. This shows that the demons who were breeding the Pinkies did have some understanding of needing something to be able to take out defensive points and deal with being hit with large rounds to the face. It's clear the demons were not as advanced when it came to the armor design after just getting totally stomped, which leads me to believe that they went from being a relatively advanced, technologically speaking, species to being sent back to what is equivalent to the Stone Age for whatever their evolutionary history may be. So as we move up the body, we see they are more meatball shaped, which may make you think that they are related to the cacodemon, which is actually how you pronounce it according to Doom.com. So if you come at me and you say I pronounced that wrong, then you're a huge dork. All right. Sorry about that. Anyways, moving on. They are not related to the cacodemon, but that is a story for another time. Last Doom video did horrific, so if this one does better, who knows? We could probably make more, but I know it's kind of a weird thing. YouTube is, you kind of want to cover the things you want to cover, but you also don't want your channel to die. So you gotta, I don't know. I'll just cover kind of what I want. Anyway, so as we move back to the tail, we see it's been incredibly blunted through inbreeding to become just a chunk of bone, changing from a more aggressive defensive option to just pure defense. However, this still is a weak point for the Pinky, and if enough force is applied to this area, the spine will be compromised, and this will actually lead to its end. So as we follow the spine, we see the hair has been completely lost in this creature, and more armoring has been applied to its shoulders and head, which, if you have attacked a Pinky Demon in Doom the Dark Ages, you will see clearly that this was an area that would be hit by pretty much anything the Doomslayer had. As a result, and with the horns providing no additional protection or function, these traits would have been bred out to have it become really more tanky, The horns are now tiny and are still forward-facing, as the secondary mandibles have been completely lost through the inbreeding process. As we see, the internal mandible has been fused together to form one giant mouth. Internal to this, we can see the hell energy is at a much higher level than it was in the pinky mount form. Because of this has also induced quite a bit of mutations on its own, further changing the creature into a bastardization of what it once was. It still sports the same beady eyes as before, but its purpose has been completely changed. Where once it was used to ride into battle, having a tenuous relationship with its rider, now it is sent in completely on its own to destroy or at minimum soften up defensive positions, allowing for other demons in turn to run in and then start dealing damage on a level that not even flex tape could fix. The pinky demon is one who is quite interesting. It's clear in its past they may have been used similar to how horses are used by humanity, or even the dragons are used by the Night Sentinels, appearing to likely have a lineage similar to big cats here on Earth with their large shoulder blades and patches of fur still present. They would be altered to have their predatory nature enhanced by hell energy. While they would have some hell energy visible from their mouths and eyes, the pinkies that would come later were much more inundated with this mutagenic wavelength. Once the Doomslayer has slaughtered so many of these creatures, it would then force them into a genetic bottleneck that would forever change pretty much everything about them, as they would be overbred and exposed to even more hell energy, creating a creature that stood on two legs despite having quadrupedal ancestry and would no longer be able to carry anyone into battle. Instead, demonic forces would opt to just drop them into an area and deal with enemies, and given their hypothesized omnivore origins, as they would be larger than the denizens of hell, yet they were able to tame them. I believe they were never full predator, as they likely would not have been easily tamed otherwise. They would then run through eating soldiers and blasting apart armor and overturning tanks, pretty much. That is until the Doomslayer arrives once more and starts mopping up the abominations that they are now. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. I got told in my last Doom episode that it sounded way too reportive, which isn't a word, I'm sure, but I'm gonna be real with you. I was burnt out pretty bad, which can happen from time to time. Probably a combination of YouTube majorly screwing with his channel and doing like 4 videos a week for 8 months straight, which I know, right? Oh, let me play the world's smallest violin, Roanoke. Listen, I love my job. This is the best job I've ever had, but coming up with new things all the time can sometimes be a little tiring. Anyways, y'all aren't here for that. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales, and Roanoke Games link in the description. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. At the astronaut tier, we have Bananas Are Epic. Thank you, sir. At the astrophysicist tier, we have Death's Dancer. Thank you as well, my man. And at the scientist tier, we have Dakota 23, Frank Shatcrank, Invictus Echo, Metric System, Ocean Gate was a cover-up for an anglerfish attack, Official Texan, and Stutz. And to the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all's support. It goes a long way towards helping out, and you are absolute ballers. But all right, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.